Okay, chapter 17 is the pathway and the integrative functions. We'll start with the somatic sensory pathways. The somatic sensory pathway relay information from somatic receptors to the primary somatosensory areas in the cerebral cortex and to the cerebellum. The pathways to the cerebral cortex consists of thousands of sets of 3 neurons. The first order primary neurons carry signals from the somatic receptors into the brainstem or the spinal cord by the cranial nerves or the spinal nerves. Number 2, the second order neurons carry signals from the spinal cord and the brainstem to the thalamus. Axon of the second order neurons decussatate to the opposite side before ascending to the thalamus. These are the interneurons. And third, the third order tertiary neurons project from the thalamus and they carry nerve impulses to the primary somatosensory areas in the postcentral gyrus where conscious perception of sensation results. So these are the interneurons. There are 2 general pathways by which somatic sensory signals entering the spinal cord ascend to the cerebral cortex. Number 1, the posterior column medial lemniscus pathways. These transmit nerve impulses for conscious proprioception and most tactile sensations. The axons of the first order neurons form the posterior dorsal column, the gracile fasciculus, and the cuneate fasciculus in each side of the spinal cord. Axons of the second order neurons decussatate in the medulla and enter the medial lemniscus, which is a projection tract that extends from the medulla to the thalamus. The third order neurons project from the thalamus to the primary somatosensory area, and the impulses conducted along this pathway give rise to the following sensations. You have fine touch, stereognosis, proprioception, and weight discrimination, and vibratory sensations. Anterolateral or spinal thalamic pathways transmit nerve impulses for pain and temperature, as well as tickle, itch, crude touch, pressure, and vibrations. Axons of the first order neurons enter the spinal cord and synapse with the second order neurons in the posterior gray horns. Axons of the second order neurons decussate and ascend to the brainstem in either the lateral spinal thalamic tract, which conveys impulses for pain and temperature, the anterior spinal thalamic tract, which conveys impulses for tickle, itch, crude touch, pressure, and vibrations. Axons of the second order neurons are entered into the thalamus and synapse with the third order neurons and project to the primary somatosensory areas. The next section is not in your notes, but the spinocerebellar pathway transmits proprioceptive information to the cerebellum. This info regulates posture and skill movements, and the pathway does not have tertiary neurons. Therefore, the info does not enter the cerebral cortex. It means it is processed at the subconscious level. Somatic motor pathways, both direct and indirect, extend from the cerebral cortex to the skeletal muscles. So the direct motor pathways. The voluntary motor impulses are transmitted from the motor cortex to the somatic efferent neurons that innervate skeletal muscles by the direct motor or the pyramidal pathways. These consist of the following 5 neurons. Number 1, the local circuit neurons receive input from the somatic sensory receptors and from higher centers of the brain. Number 2, the upper motor neurons, the UMNs, whose axons descend into the medulla, where most of the axons decussatate, the remaining ones decussate at the lower levels and terminate in the nuclei of the cranial nerves or in the anterior gray horns of the spinal cord. Number 3, the basal ganglia neurons assist movement by providing input by the thalamus to the UMNs. And the cerebral neurons also assist movement by providing input by the thalamus to the UMNs. And number 5, the lower motor units, LMNs. The axons innervate skeletal muscle Since each LMN receives and integrates excitatory and inhibitory input from many presynaptic neurons, LMNs are also called the final common pathway. The direct motor pathway conveys impulses that result in precise voluntary movements by 3 pairs of the tracts containing axons and the UMNs. Number 1, the lateral corticospinal tracts. The axons of the LMNs exit all levels of the spinal cord to innervate skeletal muscles in the limbs, hands, and feet. Number 2, the anterior corticospinal tracts. The axons of these LMNs exit the cervical and the upper thoracic segments of the spinal cord to innervate the muscles that control muscles of the neck and part of the trunk, therefore coordinating movements of the axial skeleton. The corticobulbar tracts, the axons terminate in the nuclei of the 9 pairs of the cranial nerves. The LMNs of these cranial nerves convey nerve impulses that control precise voluntary movements of the eyes, the tongue, the neck, the chewing, the facial expression, and the speech. Indirect motor pathways. The indirect or extrapyramidal pathways include all somatic motor tracts other than the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts. The upper motor neurons of the indirect pathways begin in the brainstem, and they travel along 5 major pairs of spinal cord tracts, and they terminate on the interneurons and the LMNs. So first, number 1, we have the rubrospinal tract, and it begins in the red nucleus, and it transmits nerve impulses to the opposite side of the body to regulate precise, discrete movements, especially of the distal limbs. Number 2, we have the tectospinal tract, and it begins in the superior colliculus, and it transmits nerve impulses to the opposite side of the body to the neck muscles that control movements of the head in response to the audio and the visual stimuli. Number 3, the vestibulospinal tract begins in the vestibular nucleus, and it transmits nerve impulses to the same side of the body to regulate muscle tone in response to movements of the head. It therefore plays a major role in balance. And number 4 is the lateral reticulospinal tract, and it begins in the reticular formation of the medulla. It facilitates on the same side of the body flexor reflexes, inhibits extensors reflexes, and it decreases muscle tone and muscles of the axial skeleton and the proximal limbs. Number 5 is the medial reticulospinal tract, and it begins in the pons, and it facilitates on the same side of the body the extensor reflexes, it inhibits the flexor reflexes, and it increases muscle tone in the muscles of the axial skeleton and the proximal limbs.